They came to empty her apartment. One old man stood in the doorway and wouldn't move. "You're not taking her things," he said. "Not while I'm standing here." Everyone read the top line and started packing. Nora read the whole thing, and halfway down, 2 little words made her stop cold. Something here didn't add up. Then she caught him, taping another one to another door. Quiet, quick, like he didn't want to be seen. And the look on his face when he turned around, that said everything. Everyone in that building was packing. Everyone but her. 41 years in that apartment. And now they wanted her gone in 48 hours. By the second night, the whole floor had emptied out. Door after door, left open. One light still on at the end of the hall, just one. She hadn't given up. Finally, someone official walked through that door. What he was about to find would change everything, and nobody in that hallway was ready for it. The whole courtyard was moving. Boxes, trucks, people rushing past like the building was on fire. But one woman just sat there. 78 years old, 41 years in the same apartment, and she wasn't going anywhere. Nora didn't even know her name yet. She just knelt down, took her hand, and asked one simple question. Why is everyone leaving? The answer? It didn't make any sense. And that's exactly why Nora couldn't walk away. 48 hours. That's what the notice said. Everyone get out, the building's dangerous. And people believed it. You would too, right? But Nora read it twice, then a third time. And near the bottom, tucked in small print, 2 words stopped her cold. Inspection pending. Pending? As in, it hadn't happened yet. Nobody had actually checked this building, so how could anyone know it was dangerous? Something was very wrong here, and Nora was about to find out what. But let's back up. One day earlier, none of this had happened yet. Nora was only staying in that building for a few weeks, a temporary place while things sorted out. That evening, she met Verna in the courtyard. 41 years in apartment 3B. Verna knew everyone. Every leaky pipe, every neighbor's kid, every story that old building held. It was quiet. It was home. Neither of them knew that by morning, all of it would be falling apart. The next morning, Nora met Cosmin. He'd been the building's caretaker for over 20 years. Knew every crack in every wall, literally. He showed her the old pipes, the little things he kept running with his own 2 hands. "This building's got problems," he told her, laughing. "But dangerous. No, she's still standing strong." Cosmin loved that place. So when someone suddenly called it unsafe, he'd be the first to know they were lying. Remember that. Then came the morning that changed everything. By sunrise, there was a notice on every single door. 48 hours to leave. Building unsafe. Immediate evacuation. People poured into the hallway in their pajamas, reading it over and over. You could feel the panic spread like a chill. Some folks were already on the phone booking movers. Nobody stopped to ask the obvious question. Nobody except Nora. Who decided this? And why now? Nobody had an answer. The building manager was named Amal. And when people started asking questions, he had answers ready. Too ready. "It's official," he kept saying. "The city ordered it. Nothing I can do." But Nora watched his hands. They wouldn't stay still. And every time someone pushed him, his eyes darted to the floor. See? People tell you a lot with their words. But they tell you even more with the things they can't quite look at. Amal was hiding something. The first truck rolled in, and one man was already halfway packed. Theodore, 29, lived on the second floor. Nora tried to catch him. "Wait," Did you actually see any inspection? He wouldn't even look at her, just mumbled something about being told to leave and kept walking. But here's the thing. Once Theodore left, the next family panicked. Then the next. He was the first domino, and somebody had pushed him on purpose. Theodore's apartment was already stripped bare. Nora stepped inside, and Cosmin followed. That's when she spotted it. On the floor, a plain envelope and a little white key card. Cosmin frowned. "That's not ours," he said. "We don't hand out cards like that." So where did it come from? Somebody had given Theodore something to make him leave first. Nora didn't know what yet, but she pocketed it. Cosmin gave her a look. They were both thinking the same thing now. And then Nora caught him. Amel, right there in the hallway, taping a fresh notice to another door. Quiet, quick, like he didn't want anyone to see. He froze when he spotted her. "You're putting these up yourself?" she asked. His face went pale. "I'm just following instructions," he stammered. Instructions? From who? He couldn't say, or wouldn't. But now Nora knew for sure. These notices weren't coming from the city. They were coming from inside the building. Outside, Nora ran into Birdie, the mail carrier who'd worked this block for years. If any official letter came through, Birdie was the one who delivered it. So Nora showed her the notice. Birdie squinted at it, then shook her head slow. "I deliver every official notice on this street," she said. "I never carried this one." Never. So it hadn't come through the mail at all. Someone printed it and stuck it on the doors themselves. The story was falling apart. That afternoon, Nora tracked down the person behind the hotel project next door. Her name was Ilsa. And honestly, she wasn't what Nora expected. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just a calm, elegant woman standing over a little model of her big, shiny development. Nora came in ready for a fight. But Ilsa just smiled and said, "The project doesn't need that building. We only need safe access around it." And you know what? For a second, Nora almost believed her. Ilsa had an answer for everything. She was polished, reasonable, the kind of person who never raises their voice because they never have to. But something still didn't sit right. Because if Ilsa didn't need the building gone, then why was everyone being scared out of it? Nora smiled back, thanked her politely, and left. More suspicious than ever, Nora went straight to Cosmin with the one thing bothering her most. Inspection pending. If nobody inspected the building, the danger story was fake, right? Cosmin took her up to the roof to show her the famous crack everyone whispered about. He ran his thumb along it and shrugged. "That crack? It's old. Been there for years. She's not going anywhere." Nora felt a wave of relief. Then Cosmin paused and added something that stopped her. "But I'll be honest with you. I haven't been up to check this roof in months." And just like that, the relief was gone. Because maybe the notice was a lie. But maybe, just maybe, the building really did have a problem nobody knew about. Now Nora had two fears instead of one, and a lot less time to sort them out. So Nora tried to warn people. She stood in that hallway and laid it all out. The fake seal, the notice that never came through the mail, Amel taping papers himself. But here's the hard part about telling the truth. Sometimes nobody wants to hear it. "We can't risk it," one neighbor said. "What if the building really is dangerous?" And Nora couldn't blame them. Not really, because even she wasn't 100% sure anymore. Only Verna stood by her, quietly nodding along. But two people can't stop a whole building from emptying. And then came the worst news yet. Ilsa's crew was closing off the side passage tomorrow at 4. After that, the trucks would have full access. The clock wasn't just ticking now, it was running out. Nora had less than a day to prove everyone wrong. By evening, the hallway had gone quiet. Too quiet. Door after door, empty. The neighbors Verna had known for decades. Gone, one by one. Nora found her standing in her doorway, just looking down that long, empty hall. And what Verna said next? Nora never forgot it. "The building didn't tell me to leave," she said softly. "People did." Think about that. Nobody had proven the place was dangerous. Nobody had shown a single official report. People left because other people left. Fear did all the work. And now this woman, 41 years in her home, was almost the last one standing. Nora put a hand on her shoulder, and right there, something hardened inside her. She wasn't just chasing a mystery anymore. She was fighting for someone, and she was not going to lose. Nora cornered Amol one more time, and this time, she didn't let him off easy. "Who told you to put those notices up? Just say it." Amol's whole body sagged. He looked exhausted, scared, like a man carrying something way too heavy. "It was supposed to be temporary," he finally whispered. 2 days. That's what she said. Nobody said people would actually leave. 2 days. She. So there it was. Amol wasn't the mastermind. He was just a frightened man who'd been used. Someone told him it was harmless, temporary. And he believed it, because believing it was easier than asking questions. Nora almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But feeling sorry wasn't going to save Verna's home. She needed proof. Real, official, undeniable proof. And she had until 4 o'clock tomorrow to find it. The countdown was on. By nightfall, almost everyone was gone. Nora walked the hallway with Verna, and it felt like walking through a ghost of what used to be a home. Open doors, empty rooms, boxes nobody bothered to take. 41 years of neighbors, of quiet mornings, of familiar faces, vanished in less than 2 days. And all of it built on a piece of paper nobody bothered to question. Verna stopped at her own doorway and looked down the long, empty hall. "You know the strangest part," she said. "Not one person actually saw anything dangerous. They just saw everyone else leaving. That was the whole thing, wasn't it? Fear doesn't need proof. It just needs one person to run, and the rest follow." Nora stood there, taking it all in. The silence, the emptiness. This proud old woman standing almost alone in a building she'd loved her whole life. And something inside Nora settled into place. She wasn't confused anymore. She wasn't scared anymore. She was angry. The good kind of angry. The kind that makes you refuse to give up. She had until 4 the next afternoon. One night, that was it. And she made Verna a promise right there. "You're not leaving. I'm going to fix this." Now she just had to keep her word. Nora tracked down Theodore, the man who'd left first. And this time, he actually talked. Turns out, he'd been carrying a guilty conscience ever since. "They came to me before anyone else," he admitted, staring at the table. "Offered to cover my moving costs. Said the building would be cleared in a few days anyway, so I might as well go early." So that was it. Theodore hadn't run because he was scared. He'd been paid to go first. And because he went first, calm, quick, no fuss, everyone assumed the danger was real. Why else would a young guy pack up overnight? He was the spark, the first domino, tipped on purpose. And the envelope Nora found on his floor? He slid it across the table. Inside was a temporary hotel booking and a small folded site plan. Theodore looked miserable. I didn't know people would panic like this, I swear. I thought I was just taking a deal. Nora studied his face. He wasn't a villain, just a guy who took an easy offer without asking what it was really for. And now he was ready to make it right. "Will you tell someone official what you just told me?" she asked. Theodore took a long breath. Then he nodded. That folded plan from Theodore's envelope? It changed everything. Nora spread it out on the table, and Cosman brought the old public version from the city notice board downstairs. 2 plans. Same block, same buildings. But one thing was different. The boundary line. On the old plan, the apartment building sat safely outside the hotel project. Clear, separate, protected. But on the new plan, the one from that hotel envelope, the boundary had quietly shifted. Now it cut right through where the apartment stood. Cosman's jaw dropped. "They moved the line," he breathed. That's when it all clicked for Nora. Ilsa hadn't lied when she said the project didn't need the building. On the official plan, it didn't. But somebody had redrawn the map. And on the new version, that old apartment building was sitting right where they wanted a service road and a courtyard for their shiny new hotel. This was never about safety. It was never about a crack in the roof. It was about real estate, about making people so afraid they'd leave on their own. No eviction notice, no lawyers, no fight. Just fear doing the dirty work. Nora looked at Cosman. "We've got them," she said. But having proof and making it count? Those are 2 very different things. And the clock said noon tomorrow. Proof in hand, Nora did the right thing. She called the city to request an official inspection, and the answer nearly knocked the wind out of her. "The earliest inspection we can schedule is next week." Next week? Nora looked out the window. Down in the courtyard, a moving truck had just pulled up. Verna's truck, the one that would carry away 41 years of her life by noon. Next week might as well have been next year. She didn't have days. She had hours. You ever feel that? When time just collapses? When the thing you need is a week away and the disaster is happening right now, right in front of you? Nora's mind raced. Filing the request the normal way wouldn't work. Waiting wouldn't work. She needed the inspection today, and no clerk on a phone was going to give her that. So she stopped asking nicely. She hung up, took a breath, and thought about what she actually had. A witness. 2 plans. A fake seal. A manager ready to crack. A truck idling in the courtyard with an old woman's whole life inside it. That wasn't a next week problem. That was an emergency. And now Nora had to make the city see it that way. Before noon, down in the courtyard, the movers were already reaching for Verna's boxes. And that's when Cosman planted himself in the doorway. Arms out, feet set. "Nobody's taking anything out of this building," he said, "until somebody official says it's unsafe. And nobody has." The movers froze. They looked at each other, unsure. They were just doing a job. They hadn't signed up to shove past a stubborn old caretaker guarding a doorway. Nora stepped up beside him, folder raised high. "We have proof this evacuation is based on a forged notice," she called out, loud enough for everyone in the courtyard to hear. "If anyone moves these boxes, they're part of it." That stopped everything cold. Because here's the thing about a bluff backed by real evidence. It doesn't feel like a bluff. People started whispering. A couple of neighbors who hadn't left yet drifted closer. For the first time in 2 days, the momentum wasn't running toward the trucks. It was running the other way. Verna watched from her chair, hands folded, eyes shining. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Cosmin was buying time with nothing but his own 2 feet and a whole lot of nerve. But time was exactly what Nora needed. And she was about to use every second of it. Nora and Cosmin headed down to the utility room. Cosmin kept every record of every repair he'd ever done on that building, going back decades. And Nora had a hunch it would matter. She was right. There it was, in Cosmin's own handwriting. That roof crack logged years ago. Checked, monitored, marked as stable over and over. Not a danger. Just an old building's old scar, watched carefully by a man who cared. This was it. Proof that the crack everyone whispered about had been known and safe for years. But just as Cosmin lifted the logbook, a voice came from the doorway. It was a mole, and he looked torn in half. "That log belongs to the building," he said, his voice shaking. He reached out, like part of him wanted to grab it. But Cosmin didn't even flinch. He just looked at Amol, calm and steady, and said something that landed like a quiet punch. So, to the people upstairs. Silence. You could see it hit Amol right in the chest, because that was the whole truth, wasn't it? The building, the records, the rules, none of it mattered more than the people who actually lived there. The people he'd helped scare away. Amol's hand dropped. He didn't try to stop them again. He just stood there, looking like a man finally realizing how far he'd let this go. Nora almost said something to him. Almost. But there wasn't time for gentleness now. She tucked the logbook under her arm, gave Amol one last look, and headed for the stairs. She had the record. She had the witness. She had the plans. Now she needed someone with the power to act on all of it. Nora decided to face Ilse directly. Documents in hand, she walked right into that office and laid it all out. The forged notice, the shifted boundary line, the old logbook proving the crack was safe, Theodore's paid-off early exit. She thought maybe, just maybe, Ilse would crack. She didn't. Ilse looked at the papers spread across her desk, and she didn't even blink. That cool little half-smile never left her face. "A proposed access road," she said slowly, "is not an eviction order. I never told anyone to leave that building. Show me one document where I did." And that stopped Nora cold. Because technically, Ilse was right. There was no signed order. No letter with her name demanding anyone move. She'd been careful, clever. Everything she'd done lived in that gray space, where nothing's quite illegal, but nothing's quite honest either. She hadn't forced anyone out. She'd just arranged for them to be afraid. Let the rumors spread. Let one paid man leave first. Let panic do what an eviction notice legally couldn't. Nora stood there holding a folder full of proof, and realized proof of what, exactly? That a boundary moved? That a notice was fake? None of it pointed a clean finger at Ilse. She was untouchable, and she knew it. "You should go home," Ilse said gently, almost kindly, "before you embarrass yourself." Nora's heart was pounding. She had all the pieces, and still couldn't win with them alone. But walking out of that office, one thing became crystal clear. She'd been playing Ilse's game, on Ilse's turf, by Ilse's rules. And that was never going to work. So she stopped playing it. There was one power in this whole mess bigger than Ilsa. And Nora was about to wake it up. So Nora went back to the city. But this time, she didn't ask the way she had before. The first time she'd said, "Please, can you help us? Can you schedule an inspection?" And they'd shrugged and said next week. This time, she walked up to that counter and said something completely different. People are leaving their homes right now because they believe an inspection already happened. It hasn't. There is no report, and someone is using that lie to empty an occupied building before noon today. That landed differently, because now it wasn't a favor she was asking for. It was a warning she was giving. She laid it all on the counter. The notice with a seal that didn't match any real city seal. The logbook showing the crack was monitored and safe for years. The 2 site plans with the boundary quietly moved. And the fact, the simple, undeniable fact, that elderly residents were being pressured out of an occupied building with active moving trucks, and no official had ever set foot inside. The clerk's face changed as she spoke. This wasn't a routine request anymore. This was a building full of people being cleared out on paperwork nobody could verify, with vulnerable residents still inside. That's not a next week situation. That's an emergency. And emergencies have their own rules. The official picked up the phone. "Let me get an inspector out there today." Today. Nora felt her knees almost give out with relief. She'd finally found the one lever big enough to move this whole thing, not by fighting Ilsa, but by making the truth impossible to ignore. But the trucks were still in the courtyard. Cosmin was still holding that doorway, and noon was creeping closer by the minute. It was going to come down to the wire, and then, with barely an hour to spare, he arrived. The city inspector, hard hat, clipboard, official badge, the whole thing. He walked into that courtyard, and everything just stopped. The movers set down their boxes. The whispering died. Every remaining resident turned to watch. Verna gripped the arms of her chair. Cosmin finally stepped back from the doorway he'd been guarding for what felt like forever, wiping the sweat off his forehead. And Nora? She could barely breathe. Because this was it. Everything came down to what this one man would find inside. If he said the building was dangerous, then all of it, the forged notice, the moved boundary, none of it would matter. Everyone would have to go, and Ilsa would get exactly what she wanted. But if he said it was safe, then a whole building had been emptied for nothing but greed and fear. The inspector didn't say much. He just nodded politely, asked to see the roof and the basement, and headed inside. Cosmin went with him, keys jingling, ready to show him every pipe and every beam. And the rest of them waited in that courtyard. Waited and waited. You know that kind of waiting, where every second stretches out forever? Nora paced. Verna sat perfectly still. Even the movers hung around, curious now, sensing something bigger than a moving job was happening here. Nobody left. Nobody wanted to miss it. And somewhere across the way, you can bet Ilsa was watching too. From a window, from her car, from wherever people like her watch things fall apart. Because deep down, she had to know. Once someone official actually looked, the whole house of cards was one honest word away from collapsing. The inspector came back out. And everyone leaned in to hear. He flipped through his clipboard, took his time, the way officials do when they don't realize a whole crowd is hanging on their every word. Then he spoke. "There's no immediate danger here," he said. "Nothing that requires evacuation." Nora's heart leapt, but he wasn't finished. There are a few things that need repair. The roof needs proper attention. Some work in the basement. This building should be on a regular maintenance schedule. And then the line that mattered most. But people can absolutely stay in their homes. There's no reason anyone had to leave. No reason anyone had to leave. Let those words sink in, because everyone in that courtyard felt them. A whole building, nearly empty. Families gone. Verna almost driven out of 41 years of memories. All of it. For nothing. Well, not nothing. For a hotel. For a shifted line on a map. For a woman who figured fear was cheaper than a fair fight. Notice what the inspector didn't say, though. He didn't say the building was perfect. He didn't say there were no problems at all. There was a real crack. A real roof that needed work. Cosmin had been honest about that from the start. And that honesty is exactly why this worked. Because Nora never pretended the building was flawless. She just proved it wasn't the emergency someone claimed. There's a difference between a building that needs a few repairs and a building you have to run from screaming. And that difference just saved everyone's home. Verna closed her eyes and let out a breath she'd probably been holding for 2 days. But it wasn't quite over yet, because now everyone was about to learn exactly how the panic got started. And who lit the match, with the inspector standing right there, all eyes turned to Emil. And this time, there was nowhere left to hide. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at the ground. Then, it all came pouring out. She said nobody was being forced out. He began, his voice cracking. She said an empty building would make the inspection easier, just for a couple of days. I believed her. He looked up at the faces around him. Neighbors he'd known for years, people he'd watched pack up and leave. She told me it was harmless, that everyone would come right back. I put up the notices because she made it sound like I was helping, like it was procedure. Nora watched him carefully. And you know what? She believed him. Because that's exactly how it works. Nobody hands you a villain's script and asks you to play the bad guy. They hand you something small, something that sounds reasonable. Just put up a notice. Just for 2 days. Nobody gets hurt. And by the time you realize what you're actually part of, you're already in too deep to stop it. A mole wasn't evil. He was weak. He didn't ask the questions he should have because not asking was easier. And he let fear do damage he never meant to cause. I'm sorry, he said finally, looking right at Verna. I should have said no. I should have asked more. It didn't undo anything. But it mattered. Because now there was a witness, an official record, and the manager himself admitting the whole evacuation was built on a lie he'd been talked into. The paper trail led straight to one person. And that person had just run out of gray space to hide in. Ilsa showed up in the courtyard not long after. Maybe she came to salvage something. Maybe she just couldn't stay away. And for the first time, that cool, unshakable composure had a crack in it. She looked at the inspector, at a mall, at the neighbors starting to drift back. And she knew. She'd lost. But Ilsa being Ilsa, she didn't fall apart. She lifted her chin and tried one last time. I never told anyone to move, she said. I never signed a single order. You can't pin this on me. And technically, she was still right. Nora looked at her for a long moment. Then she said something quiet that landed harder than any shouting could have. No, you never told anyone to move. You just made sure they thought they had to. Ilsa didn't answer. 'Cause there was no answer. That was the whole game, laid bare in one sentence. She never gave an order she could be blamed for. She just built the fear, lit the match, and stepped back to watch people run. But here's what she hadn't counted on. With an official inspection on record saying the building was safe, with a signed statement from a mole, with Theodore ready to talk, and residents already moving back in, her plan was dead. You can't build a hotel courtyard on top of a building full of people who refuse to leave and have every right to stay. The moved boundary line meant nothing now. There was no fear left to work with. Ilsa pulled her coat tight, turned, and walked away without another word. No apology. People like her rarely give one. But she was done, and that was enough. The building was saved. Now it was time to bring everyone home, and that's when the best part happened. One by one, the trucks stopped pulling away and started coming back. Word spread fast. The building was safe. The evacuation was a lie. You can come home. Families who'd spent 2 frantic days packing now hauled everything right back up those stairs. And honestly, nobody seemed to mind the extra work. There was laughing in that courtyard now. Real laughing. Boxes went hand to hand up the staircase, neighbor passing to neighbor the way it should have been all along. Cosmin was in the middle of it, of course, directing traffic, cracking jokes, pretending his eyes weren't a little wet. Nora passed him a box and he grinned. "Not bad, kid," he said. "Not bad at all." Theodore came back too. He didn't have to. His conscience could have stayed quiet, and nobody would have known. But there he was, carrying furniture back into a building he'd been paid to abandon, trying in his own quiet way to make it right. Even Amel showed up to help. Nobody quite knew what to say to him. But when he picked up a heavy box and started up the stairs, an older neighbor gave him a small nod. Not forgiveness exactly, but a start. And through all of it, Verna sat in her chair right in the middle of the courtyard. The same spot where 2 days ago she'd sat alone while everyone rushed past her. Except now, nobody rushed past. Everyone stopped. A pat on the shoulder here, a warm word there. The woman who almost lost everything was suddenly surrounded by the whole building she'd loved for 41 years. She'd stayed. And because she stayed, so did everyone else's home. As the evening settled in, the courtyard finally went quiet again. But a good kind of quiet this time. The kind that comes after a storm passes. Nora sat down next to Verna on the old bench, the same one where they'd first met just a couple of days ago. Feels longer, doesn't it? Funny how fast a life can almost get turned upside down, and how fast it can get set right again when just one person refuses to look away. Verna reached over and patted Nora's hand. "You know," she said, "I'd made my peace with going. An old woman learns not to fight things she can't win." She smiled, soft and a little sly. "Turns out I just needed someone to remind me which fights are worth it." Nora smiled back. She thought about everything it took to get here. Reading a notice 3 times when everyone else read it once. Asking one more question when it would have been easier to stay quiet. Standing in a doorway. Walking into that city office and refusing to leave. None of it was dramatic, really. No big heroic moment. Just a lot of small choices to not give up. That's usually how it goes. The people who actually change things aren't the loudest ones in the room. They're the ones who notice what everyone else walks past. Who kneel down and take an old woman's hand and ask why she's the only one still sitting there. Overhead, lights flicked on in windows that had been dark that morning. The building was breathing again, full of people, full of life. and Verna looked up at all those glowing windows with tears in her eyes. But this time, they were the happy kind. That evening, the courtyard was full again. Neighbors on the steps, a kid laughing somewhere. Life flooding right back into a place a lie nearly emptied. Verna sat in the middle of it all, not alone this time. She looked out at her home coming back to life and said the thing nobody forgot. The building never told me to leave. People did. Funny thing is, people were the ones who helped me stay. And Nora just smiled and quietly slipped away.